Hello, friends, and welcome to the Chinwag podcast. I am your host, Paul Giamatti, and joining me once again, Dr. Smooth, Mr. Smooth himself.
Dr.
Smooth.
Dr. Smooth.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how I want to be addressed from henceforth is Dr. Smooth.
Absolutely. Can I call you doctor? I call you professor all the time. I can actually call you doctor.
You can call me doctor too. I do have a doctorate in philosophy. And so I am sometimes nervous about using doctor because people might think I need to save somebody's life in an emergency. But
I understand.
I am a professor, very valuable with your spiritual needs.
You've never found yourself needing to leap up in a theater and saying, somebody says, is there a doctor of philosophy in the house? Really?
Administer existential
Everybody
insights.
Stand back. I'm a doctor of philosophy. Give the guy air. Let me.
No, I'm good.
Let me talk to him about his imminent demise.
That's relevant today.
It is. It's actually very relevant, actually, because we have a really, really amazing, wonderful guest today, a journalist and an author. She has had a lifelong interest in death.
Yes.
And all things related to death. Her name is Hayley Campbell, a fascinating woman, and she's written a wonderful book called All the Living and the Dead.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking to her about that because she gets into sort of the whole world of death in terms of the people who have to deal with death.
Yeah, she interviews there's a ton of people who work in the death industry that are completely hidden behind this cultural curtain, that we're afraid to look at. But she goes and interviews them. They turn out to be some fascinating characters.
Very fascinating.
Morticians, autopsies, all that
guys
stuff.
Who work in crematoriums, guys who clean up crime scenes, things like that.
Cryogenic chambers, freezing.
Cryogenic chambers. Yeah. Steve, do you think Walt Disney's head is in a chamber underneath the Magic Castle?
I hope so.
I hope
he
so
is resuscitated.
Too. I really hope so. I really hope that when the time comes, he and Ted Williams will be brought back to life. Because isn't Ted Williams' head in a jar somewhere?
That legend is, but don't quote me on this. But you did tell me you were willing to be frozen, and I'm wondering just the head or you want the whole body, the whole shebang?
Well, that's an interesting question. I suppose I would want why would I want the whole shebang when I could get a new body? So why don't I just the head? Just the head will do me. I don't know, the whole thing. I don't understand how the hell that's supposed to work, but we'll get into that a bit with Hayley Campbell. But before we do that, just a friendly reminder, right, Steve?
Yes, people, please go and rate us if you like the show. And if you're still here listening to us, you must have some interest in the show.
Yeah, you're a masochist or something.
So give us a good rating over at Apple and give us feedback, too. We're starting to get letters and comments, and we're starting to answer them, too, and it's really fun. So
it's very nice to get comments and stuff from you because there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming in. Anyway, all that kind of house cleaning businesses aside, let's move on to talk to Hayley Campbell about her book, All the Living and the Dead, and about her thoughts about death. And by the way, friends, as we embark on this conversation with Hayley, a word of caution. We do get into some intense territory, sensitive areas. We talk about some pretty intense stuff. We're talking about death, and we get into some sensitive areas. So for people who might not want to listen to this stuff, just a word of caution.
Yes, I mean, it's inevitable to get into this, but be forewarned.
Mm-hmm. Be forewarned that things get a little dark in this conversation. Hello, Hayley.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. It's a real pleasure.
Welcome to the Chinwag.
Yeah, welcome to the Chinwag. Your book is great. Your book is really awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, really, really
Everyone
fantastic.
should buy this book.
Absolutely. Get out there and buy that book. It's really fantastic. I want to ask you something that's slightly off topic, though, first of all, which is, do you still sleepwalk? Are you still a sleepwalker?
I am. How did you know this?
Aha!
We do our research here.
Say, deep dive. I'm just very. I have my ways of finding out, and I'm fascinated by like crazy sleep things.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by sleep paralysis and all kinds of things like that. And sleepwalking is something super interesting to me.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. And do you still experience it?
I do. Yeah, it's not as bad as it used to be. Like there was a point in my life where I was trying to escape my apartment while nude
Oh my God.
Really?
And it got to a point where like my boyfriend at the time woke up in the night and I was pulling posters off the wall, and then I tried to leave the flat, and we lived in Brixton in London.
Oh,
and
sure.
it was 3 a.m. And so then he started having to like lock me in at night and hide the key. But now it's more like, you know, I will unpot hot plants or
That's random.
Those goddamn plants. You're just waking up.
I know.
Fascinating. And
wait,
did you? No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, did you when you woke up the next day and your boyfriend told you were doing this? Did you have any dream recollection? Like, was there any remembrance of it?
Yeah, is it like a blackout or something? You just don't have any.
Sometimes it's a blackout, but sometimes it's a memory of having a perfectly reasonable conversation with someone and them not understanding. Like the other night, my current boyfriend, so a different one, said, I woke up in the middle of the night and I looked at him dead in the eye and I said, I am fully awake. I'm fully awake. I'm not sleepwalking. I have to tell you something. And he's like, he's got the duvet up to his chin. He's like, terrified. What is it? And apparently I leaned in and I said, you've got shit on your head.
Ooh.
And I'm like, hold still. And I tried to wipe it away and I went, oh, it's just your hand. And then apparently I conked out immediately.
Amazing.
Wow.
I don't know where this comes from.
That's fascinating. And did you do anything to treat it or anything? Do you do anything? Did you go to like a sleep lab or anything like that? Is there anything you can do for it? I mean, I know Mike Birbiglia.
Yes.
He has this problem, right?
I know Mike Birbiglia, and he has an extreme form of this, where he will literally like jump out a window.
Yeah, his book was a cautionary tale to me.
Yes,
indeed. All the stuff about how you have to tell the hotel that you have this problem so they can put you on the ground floor. I'm supposed to do all that. Wow. I don't do it.
Really? So you have it enough that it's like it's a concern that it's like
not as bad as Mike. I've never thrown myself out of a window.
Mike has to be.
He did that. He went out a window.
Yeah, I think he went out a window. He has to sleep in a restraining sort of like snuggly thing. He has to wear. I don't know if he still has to do that, but I think he's had sort of treatment for it. I think he's had things that have kind of helped him out with it.
Yeah, if you ask doctors about this, they're just like, "Are you stressed?" And you go, "Yeah," and they go, "Well, try and be less stressed," and then they send you home.
Interesting. So it's a result of stress.
I had a friend who was going to have a little birthday party for another mutual friend of ours. So she buys a chocolate cake. She brings it home, puts it in the fridge. Later that night, she goes to sleep. She wakes up and the cake is gone.
Boom.
And she's like, somebody fucking came in and ate the cake. And then she like sees this in the garbage and she's like, I don't understand. And then she goes to brush her teeth. There's cake all over her mouth.
Really? She just fucking chowed the cake
down. Ate the whole fucking thing.
Well, that would happen apparently on Ambien a lot. If you took Ambien, you would cook a fucking chicken and then you'd just like and just eat the whole thing.
I've made elaborate salads while sleepwalking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but not eating them, just made them and then made a mess of the kitchen and then going back to bed. I woken up in the morning like someone fucking broke into my house and made a salad.
And made a salad. Fantastic.
Well, I read that first thing I read was that it's like the front of your brain goes to sleep and the limbic system is awake when this is happening. But then I read that it happens not during REM sleep, but in non-REM sleep is where it more often happens. And I'm thinking like, what if there's just like nothing going on? Like you're just a machine making a salad, like no fucking consciousness at all. That's creepy.
Have you ever spoken to a person who's sleepwalking?
No.
It is like there's nothing going on. It is like they're a robot. Because there was my brother and my sister both sleepwalk. So there was a time when I was growing up that all three of us were just wandering the house in the middle of the night.
That's awesome. Just everybody just wandering around the house making salads and jumping out the window.
My brother was peeing in the bin because it had a flip-top lid.
See, I love stuff like that. That's so crazy.
The whole family.
Fascinating. That's fascinating to me. The only experience I've ever had, sorry, but get off of sleepwalking, man. I just was like, the only experience, I lived in this crazy, creepy, gigantic house on a university campus. My dad taught at a university, and there were 1 million bedrooms in this place because there'd be like visiting professors and stuff would stay in his bedroom. So a lot of the bedrooms were empty. And one day I woke up in a different bedroom and I was lying perfectly with my arms at my side like I was in a coffin. And the blankets and sheets were pulled up perfectly in my chin and they were tucked in. Fucking
like you're in
blankets and shit.
hospital.
Yeah. And I was like, how the fuck did I get into this bed? And the sheets are still tucked in. Anyway, that was a friend of mine thought that was proof I was abducted by aliens.
Yeah.
But not sleepwalking. That was abducted by aliens.
Or your parents were really messing with you.
Or somebody was fucking with me. Or I was, but that's the only experience I've ever had where I was like, what the fuck just happened? I'm in a different part of the house and
I have those all the time.
Do you really? You wake up somewhere else in the house?
Well, not somewhere else. But like with the pot plant thing, like I woke up with soil all over my hands, like in Pet Cemetery.
Yeah.
He wakes up with like his feet covered in soil.
Oh, yeah.
And you go, what is this? And it took some investigation wandering around the flat to figure out
Fantastic.
what I had done, where I had been.
This is kind of a good segue because when we read the book, we discovered that your childhood was kind of strange in the sense that you had a lot of acquaintance with death imagery and so forth. Maybe you should tell us a little bit how you got into, like how you got comfortable with death as a kind of phenomenon and the images and stuff.
Are you comfortable with death? That's a whole other question.
Yeah, that is a good one. But I also grew up around cartoonists, and you'd know all about them with American Splendor.
That's right.
By the way, my dad is the cartoonist Hayley Campbell, and we
Yes, I know. Yes.
We agreed a long time ago that American Splendor was the best comic book movie.
Absolutely.
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
It really
that's
was.
Nice to hear. That's great. Thank you very much. It does it well. It captures something. Yeah.
It really does. And I always loved it because, I'm also a big fan of Robert Crumb. I piggybacked him through Soho a few years ago. Why not?
Sure.
We did, yeah. So I grew up like around cartoonists who are weird guys.
Yeah.
And my dad was working on a book called From Hell with Alan Moore, which is about Jack the Ripper. And so while he was drawing all this stuff, there were, autopsy pictures and crime scene photographs everywhere. And I was never frightened or grossed out about them. I just wanted to know what was going on. And also I thought all dads were doing this. It was only when my friends came over and they're like, what is it? Like, I couldn't understand that, other people's dads weren't at home just drawing dead ladies all day. But I would ask him questions about stuff, and it was like practical, basic stuff. I was obsessed with skeletons, but it was that kind of stuff I wanted to see. I wanted to know what happened to bodies when they went in the ground and how they became skeletons. And because I went to a Catholic school, I found out that you're not supposed to ask questions about that because the priest would, he'd always talk about heaven, but also he'd get pissed off with you. So I got kicked out of the class that you go to in order to get your Holy Communion. So I never got that because the priest didn't like me. He actually told my parents, stop bringing her here. She's only...
Oh, man.
Really?
She's only coming here for the cookies, which was true.
But your Catholic thing, the Catholics have a weird thing about death. Like they're both, if you go to Italy, it's just death and dismemberment everywhere. But then you go to Catholic school and they're like, this doesn't happen. We live forever. Go away,
But also death is like the goal because heaven is the goal. So it's the thing you're working towards. But it's like the body doesn't really matter, even though there are these holy relics and these things. I found it confusing because it felt like they were hiding things from me. And I don't like it when people hide things from me. And so I just grew up going... like wanting to know the answers to all these things and wanting to see stuff. And it's really, really hard to see dead bodies. They're not, we didn't have open coffin funerals, even though I have had, I had friends die when I was a kid. I'd go to the funeral and it would just be a coffin.
You didn't see
them. And so as a kid, I found it really, really hard to focus on what was happening in the actual funeral and the fact that my friend had died because I was looking at the coffin going, what is in there? And does she look like, because I watched zombie movies and I'd seen all these pictures on my dad's drawing board. So I had this place where people could have given me information, but instead they told me not to talk about it. So I filled it that space as best I could with nonsense from horror movies. And I made this, I painted this picture that was so much worse than anything that could have been in that box.
And did you have an awareness of your own death too? Were you saying this is going to happen to me? I mean, at what point were you aware that like, oh yeah, I'm going to die and that's what this means? And did you have any sense of that too? as well as looking.
I always had that.
So you always had this sense, because I'm always intrigued that some kids seem to register that and then some kids just don't for a while. Yeah. But some kids seem to really be like, oh, fuck, I'm going to be dead. This is going to be me.
Yeah. And a lot of people I interviewed for the book remember the moment where they found out. I don't remember that. And I did ask my dad, was there did you try and tell me? And it just seems like it was always there. And I never had a special moment where I was, going to live forever. And then I wasn't. It's just, it's always been a practical thing. So it pissed me off that people wouldn't talk about it.
And then what about like in school, were your peers like, oh, you're creepy, don't, or were they like, yeah, let's find out? Because I think Paul's right. It's a minority of people who are interested in looking directly at death. And in fact, we all try to avoid it as much as possible,
We do. But so I had a friend whose mum was a nurse. And in nursing school at the time, she was an older mum and she had to procure her own human skull for some reason for study, and she still had it. And so whenever I went over to the friend's house, I'd be like, can I see the skull? And they'd get it out of the cupboard. And then we, a few years later in high school, because when I was asking to see the skull, I would have been about 10. And then in high school, we were told to bring in an item for a still life class. And people were bringing in apples and bananas. And I had gone to my friend's mum.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because the old still life paintings all had skulls
all
in
had
them.
A skull, absolutely,
and I was like, that is going to be super cool. My teacher will love me. I brought it in and everybody freaked out.
Sure.
They said, don't touch that, you'll get death germs off it.
Oh, God.
And I got detention for bringing this thing in and I had to take it home immediately.
That's the tradition of memento mori. All those paintings, the Vanitas stuff.
Remember death.
It's supposed to remind you of your own death. So then you'll be a more virtuous person, I guess, in part, right?
Yeah. And I thought it was a bit rich of the Catholic school to give me detention when that is a religion that keeps like severed hands
constantly
in bell jars.
Like the tooth of a saint,
Exactly.
But the whole open casket thing is very Catholic, isn't it? I was not raised Catholic, so I don't really know this stuff. But I mean, isn't this sort of looking at the body and stuff like that in the open casket? Isn't that Catholics do that, don't they?
I think they do in America, not in Australia, not in the UK.
Okay.
You can go and see them, and they call them in the Chapel of Rest, which is just a little religious, but only if you want it to be room at the back of a funeral home where you can go and see them before the actual funeral. But most people don't go and see their people. They go, I don't see there's any point.
Do Catholics, are they against cremation? Or are you supposed to be, there's not anything that says you can't cremate people and stuff like that?
No, it's fine.
I was an altar boy, so I was raised Catholic too, and I was an altar boy for many years. My brothers and I would go and serve, and we would serve at funerals. Some people would have the casket open, some would be closed. And I remember being creeped out, and also I remember being annoyed that the priest would say things like, your loved one's not dead, your loved one lives forever. And I remember being sort of, then I sort of went through an atheist phase. I'm still kind of in it, but I remember now I'm thinking like, I kind of actually want to hear that with my loved ones. Like I'm sort of more into denial now.
Now you feel that way?
Yeah,
really?
I do.
Really? I'm surprised to hear that.
I get that. I envy people who believe that.
Yeah.
Because it sounds nice.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
But I don't believe it.
I don't think I do either, but I really want to hear it.
Oh, it gets on my nerves. All that kind of like funeral home talk and priest talk of like they're happy now and stuff gets on my nerves, actually. I don't love it.
It does.
And actually, there's a real absence of that in a lot of the people you talk to because it's a practical way of dealing with death. There isn't a lot of this sort of...
The workers.
Yeah, and a lot of them hate the euphemisms that are used in the funeral industry, which I hate as well. Even things as basic as, embalming is called a hygienic treatment over here. So people think that's just like washing the body and it's not. It's far more invasive and it's not always required. And so people end up agreeing to expensive things that just because they don't know what they're agreeing
what
to.
What it means.
Right, yeah.
So it's dodgy, I think, in a way that could be, less of a problem if you just straight up said what the issue was.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about the embalming process and it is like, the question I had when I was reading it is like, why do we try to preserve bodies and sort of turn them into these rubberized versions that last for, forever? It doesn't make sense at all.
Then you're hiding it 6 feet underground and you're never going to see it again.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah.
I went in with that same opinion because I've read Jessica Mitford's The American Way of Death, which is a great book, and it's very bitchy and very funny, and it's kind of she's saying that the American funeral industry is preying on the vulnerable and making them get these things that buy these things they don't really need. So I went into the embalming chapter with all of these opinions, and it's the only chapter where I had pre-existing things of convince me otherwise. And I don't love the process of embalming, but I can see why people do it now. If someone's been through something hugely physically traumatic and they're, like a husband has been crushed to death in a machine, which was a story I was told, but she needs to see him in order to go, right, he's dead and I need to get on with grieving. It's a bit difficult to show someone a mashed up body. So, and they're not going to make them perfect, but they've got something to say goodbye to. So there's that reason. There's also the fact that when a disaster team is put together for like a tsunami or some mass fatality situation, I didn't know that part of that disaster team was an embalming group.
Really?
Because you can't just post bodies back. You need to preserve them because somebody at the other end is going to be receiving them at the airport.
Right.
So they're part of this hugely important disaster team. I just thought from Jessica Mitford's book, they're kind of creepy people who are trying to squeeze money out of people. But it's far more emotional, and it's more than just the chemicals they're putting through the body to preserve them. There's the fact that they're finding out what perfume this person wore when they were alive so that they can... They can spray them, because they said it's all about trying to trigger emotions and they're never going to get the person just right. I loved the story. It was this like middle-aged guy who was quite like, I expected to see him more in a pub or something. He didn't strike me as what I would think an embalmer would look like. And he was telling me that whenever he was embalming someone, he has to do their makeup as well. They don't have like a separate makeup person here. and he said he'd kind of have to play detective because he'd get the little old lady's handbag. He'd ask for it and he'd go through it and find the makeup that she used all the time, the things that were used down to the nub, the thing, the lipstick that was barely in the tube anymore. And he would try and put together her face because, an old lady, she'll do her face up before she leaves the house. And if you see her without that, she won't look as you remember
she won't be
her.
The same, not at all.
So it was far more delicate and caring than what I had been led to believe. I'm sure there is the side of the industry that Mitford talked about, but the guy I interviewed was... he was really tender with it. It was really nice.
I don't wonder that at some level, too, there isn't some deep psychological need to think, in some sense, they're still there. The body is still there. The body still looks like them, and it's down there. And when I stand there, I can imagine that they're there. And, and for some people, probably a sense of, maybe not literal, but resurrection. Like, well, they could come back. And if I see them, they're still going to look. If I go to heaven, they're still going to look the same. And their body is going to be the same. Maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I live near Highgate Cemetery in London, and that's the site of a famous exhumation because Gabriel Rossetti hadn't written anything in years, I think. But what he had done is he had buried a book of poetry with his wife, Christina. And then, they were like, what are we going to publish now? And he said, well, all my work, I buried it with my wife. And so they dug her up for the book.
Really?
And in the middle of the night, and they told him she's the one, her from the paintings. She's the one with the red hair in the pre-Raphaelite paintings.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
They dug her up and they told him she looked exactly the same, except her hair had grown to fill the coffin.
Oh, God.
Which is bullshit.
Really?
It is
Which
bullshit.
is that your hair won't keep growing?
No, the skin pulls back.
So it looks like it grows.
So it looks like it's grown a little bit, but it definitely wouldn't have grown to fill the coffin.
No.
But that's something they told a grieving man having ordered the exhumation of his wife, which is a horrible thing to do.
Yeah.
But there are these little lies.
Yes, exactly. It's a comforting thing to him to think that his wife's. It's interesting. That's interesting. So it's the skin retracting that's interesting.
Yeah. So it'll look like your beard has grown, and it really hasn't.
One of the dead bodies I've seen in my life was at a Jewish funeral where they bury the body pretty quickly. It's all happening pretty quickly, and so you could go into the room next door and look at the body if you wanted to. And I was with my son. It was my father-in-law, and we were both like, you want to go look at the body? And we were kind of like, yeah. I mean, it felt really prurient and kind of creepy, but we were like, I think we should go look at the body, you know? And so, so we went, but it was interesting because I thought I've never seen him unshaven in my life. And he had 5 o'clock shadow. He had sort of whiskers growing, which was really shocking and strange to see because he was a very immaculate man.
Yeah, he should have shaved him.
It's these little things that, that's what you remember now.
Yes.
Everybody
totally
remembers the different thing.
Yeah.
And so they try and make them look as you remember them.
Yeah.
One of the things that happens in your book is you begin to see how Americans in particular are very resistant to the decay of the body.
To acknowledging death at all. Yeah.
We're addicted to beauty standards. I was on Thailand and I was hiking around and came across this monk who was meditating in a cave. He was doing a rains retreat, monastic tradition. He was from Bangkok and he was in the jungle for like just the rain season. And he was meditating and he had basically like a drawing, kind of a bad painting of a corpse on the wall. And he would just sit there looking at it, like meditating on it all day. And I thought, this is so un-American.
Yeah. There's traditions in Tibetan, and in some Tibetan Buddhism, you're supposed to actually spend the night with a dead body, I think.
Yeah.
You're actually supposed to sleep in a room with a dead body. And they keep the dead body a lot of the time when it dies, they keep the body in the corner for quite a while and feed it and do all that, like reading the Book of the Dead to it and stuff like that. And those cultures where they preserve the body and bring it out. And like, I think in Indonesia.
Indonesia.
And I just saw in New Guinea a picture of a guy he was a chieftain, and he had the chieftain from 200 years ago still that they would bring out.
Wow,
which
really?
That seems like, and if you're going to preserve it, bring it out, use it.
There's a reason to be preserved.
No, it's sort of like, I get that. It's like, okay, trot it out, bring it out.
Yeah, but like, I think this is why I like the idea of cremation. Because there's no point to being preserved indefinitely and then put in the ground. And I find that creepy. And I don't like the idea of them like building tunnels for trains and digging me up or something in the future.
That's true. Yeah.
So I like the idea of getting out of the way and no one can touch me.
But conversely, the Americans, why do the British seem to be so macabre? Or at least we think of them as being macabre, and we think of them as having this more kind of like thing about sort of like death and Jack the Ripper and stuff like that. I mean, it's a cliche about them maybe, or a generalization, but it seems like it's a culture that it's at least maybe more comfortable with death. I don't know.
Absolutely not. I think the British are worse off than the Americans.
More repressed.
Far more repressed.
Well, that's a given.
I know. But just talking to people after my book came out, Americans seem to want an invitation to talk about death. They are desperate to talk about it. Whereas the British, so many people, when I've told them what my book is about, they've kind of gone, why? Whereas Americans go, let me tell you about all the dead bodies I've seen.
Interesting.
Let me ask you about this. Like I found it amazing. I find Americans are much more comfortable talking about it and being open with it.
Fascinating.
Here it's been kind of an uphill battle. I've written this book trying to get people to talk about it, but not just talk about it in a, let's have cake and talk about grief way. I want people to talk about their fears of decomposition and what they want to know about. And the Americans are much more interested in getting into it. I cannot explain you people.
Believe me, and it's getting harder and harder to explain us. We're only getting weirder.
You were talking in the book about Ernest Becker and this theory called denial of death, which I think is something I really like. And I know he developed this in the 70s, and then it's become something called a terror management theory. There's sort of a version of it now that's called terror management theory. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's something like all of culture is in many ways a way of denying or distracting ourselves from death. Is that a fair? So like science, art,
everything.
Like everything is a way to avoid.
I've always thought urbanization was a way of like just staving off death, kind of staving off time and death.
Build stuff.
Yeah, just build shit. Build shit and put lights and street lights. So it's not the nighttime, it's daytime. You know what I mean? It's just all of this like, no, everything's fine. We've got control of everything. You know what I mean? It's that kind
That's
of
why
thing.
everyone lost their minds when they were locked down and they couldn't do all the stuff that keeps them busy mentally and physically. And it's why I found, because I was still in contact with all the people who were working in the mortuaries, I was messaging them going, what's happening?
Yeah.
And they were stressed, but I found that they dealt with it better because they felt like they were helping. And I think it's a bit like Fred Rogers says, look for the helpers. They were the helpers, so they had something to do, whereas we were sitting at home. I was writing a book about death going, oh my God. But it just...
Wow. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
But we weren't doing anything that actually made any difference at that point.
Do you think that, I mean, you say something towards the end of your book, I'm paraphrasing, but I don't, that to some extent, these people with this kind of hands-on constant contact with death process trauma better, maybe generally trauma better, at least the trauma of death better. Do you think they actually do, or are they numb to it?
I went in thinking they would be numb to it, but I think the conclusion I came to is that they all saw the same things we saw, and it's not that they were cool with it. It's that they had figured out a way to be okay enough to keep doing their job. And also, I found that each person had something that they wouldn't do.
Oh,
like the guy in the crematorium, when I told him, because I tell them about each other as a way of getting them to talk. And they all had their one little thing that they were doing. And I think that is the key. They had this slim little picture of death. They weren't seeing all the horror at once. They were just working on their one little thing. And they all were looking at me like I was crazy because I was trying to look at all of it. And I think that they kind of make peace with it in their mind because they are bettering things in their one little patch. They're not trying to fix everything. They're not hearing everybody's sob stories. It was a really tricky balance. And some people had a better balance than others. And it took me a long time to try and figure out how to get all the pictures right in my head, because there were things I saw that knocked me down and other things I was completely fine with. But it was strange seeing what other people were not okay with. Like the man in the crematorium thought it was really weird that I dressed a dead man for his funeral. Like he was like, why would you do that? I'm like, you've spent 30 years in a basement burning bodies.
Shoving people in here. Yeah.
But he was like, no, I couldn't touch them. And so it's just really weird, the little limits that people put on.
They have their own little defense mechanisms. And it sounds like, to me, this is my sort of untutored, that you're looking at the big picture and like they're just looking at this slice, and that's how they keep sane. Well, that's that Shirley Jackson quote about absolute reality. You can't live with this all the time. You can't live with all of it all the time. You'll lose your mind. And I thought it was fascinating. He didn't believe in ghosts, which I thought was kind of great. That the guy working down there, like shoving except the grieving people with ghosts, which I thought was an amazing thing to say. That was cool. But the fact that do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in stuff like that? Do you subscribe?
Do I believe in ghosts?
Yeah.
No,
not at all.
No.
Zero, nothing.
No ghosts. Although the most frightening things for me to read are ghost stories. Shirley Jackson, Susan Hill. For some reason, ghost stories, even though I don't believe in them, I can't explain it. I can't explain it. They freak me out more than anything else.
But you've never experienced them and you don't believe in them. That's interesting.
I don't believe. I've been left alone in rooms with dead bodies and not being freaked out. They're just, I don't find dead bodies frightening at all.
But do you think a spirit departs them, or it's a material machine and the machine is wound down? That's you know what I mean? Like which?
I think I think it's a material machine and the machine is wound down.
It's just a meat machine with these weird, like little electrical sparks, just animated meat.
Well, when you say it like that.
Well, but I mean, that's,
But I don't think that is an unmagical idea of what a person is. I find like the thing I get from being around, seeing the autopsies or even being in medical museums like the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia or the Hunterian here, is that you see all these pieces of people in jars and you go, it is fucking magic that any of that works. And I don't think you need to bring in religion and souls and spirits to make that magical. I think science is incredible.
Fascinating enough that it's brain chemicals and little electrical charges are just making this stack of meat walk around and do stuff.
Stack of meat.
That's incredible.
I loved the woman in the autopsy room who had just disemboweled a man, and we were looking into his empty cavity, and she said, "Isn't it amazing that all of this stuff just stays inside you and it doesn't fall out your ass?"
It's true, though. It's true, but then it
makes you look at people a whole different way when you're just walking down the street.
No, whole different way. It's incredible, and that it all sort of stays where it's supposed to. That it's not like, whoops, my lungs just slipped down. That it all just keeps working is actually astonishing. That the heart keeps working. That all of that was actually when I had the realization of death as a child. It was the realization of the mechanism stopping. I was about 7 and I was like, oh, I'm not going to be breathing anymore. I won't have this breathing happening anymore. It wasn't anything other than, that's weird. That feels uncomfortable and terrible to not be breathing and things like that. It was all a very kind of physical thing. It wasn't this sort of...
Well, the breath was considered by the Greeks to be like this special element, like called a pneuma. And it was, or anima. So you have the 4 elements, but then you have this breath, which is the soul. And then,
and it's a different thing from the 4 elements. That's just air. It's
Plato thought it goes on, and that's what influenced religion. But Aristotle just thought, then it's done. Then it's over.
So it's kind of like a soul or something a little bit.
Yeah, like we interpret that word to mean psychology, but psyche really was more like this, almost like a respiration, like the activating principle of the body. But I was wondering, Hayley, because you make some very oblique reference to this, but did you perceive that men and women have a different view on death? Because I know you talk about it a little bit, but what was your take on that?
There were different angles on this one. I asked the crime scene cleaner if men and women kill themselves in different ways. Oh. And he said yes. Yeah. And I thought that was interesting.
How so? What was the difference?
He said men make a mess and women don't. men like a shotgun suicide, whereas women, he said, and he said it was something like women seem to tiptoe out.
It's less histrionic. There's less histrionics on the way out.
It'll be pills or razors in a bath, whereas men leave a mess. And that was just from, I don't know how that stacks up with statistics, but that was just from him cleaning houses.
Yeah.
But I found that even when I was just talking to publishers, if there was a man in the room and I was talking about death and dead bodies, he'd kind of start squirming, whereas the women would lean in and go, and then what happened? And then what happened to the body? And women seem to... it's well written about that women love true crime stuff. And I think that is a different thing. Maybe that's trying to understand what the monster and, get as close as you possibly can to the thing that you're frightened of. But I do think that generally speaking, women seem to have a closer relationship to the viscera of being alive, the blood. They were
giving birth, childbirth.
100%. Yeah, totally.
And they seem to have a more practical approach to it, whereas the men I spoke to were more talking about souls and spirits, whereas the women were quite practical with it.
Amazing. And That's awesome.
I really liked that. But and if you read anything about the increase of women working in the funeral industry, which is true, but I think that is just, there's an increase in women working in every industry.
Yeah.
So but there's a lot of stuff about how it's because women want to be funeral directors because they're more in touch with their emotional side. And I put that to a lot of women in the funeral industry, and all of them rolled their eyes.
That's why.
And I agree with them, because I've met horrible women and I've met really tender men. So I think it just, I really don't think that has anything.
I always say, I measure that by, and I read something that you loved, like Daphne du Maurier, and you like that's kind of like,
yeah.
And I always find, because I love reading stuff like that, and I always find that the women's books are way more disturbing, way darker, way more willing to go to a much more fucked up dark place, way less sentimental about shit, way more, and it's so much better. They're way better. I prefer crime shit written by women because there's no screwing around. It's really great.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Shirley Jackson before. I love her.
Me too. And she's, I mean, it's just no bullshit going on in that stuff at all. It just cuts right to the chase, and it's terrifying. Genuinely.
Oh, yes.
Genuinely disturbing. Yeah, no, I love it.
But you see too, like there's and you mentioned this as well, that there's kind of a transhumanist or post-humanist movement of people who want to, and you talk about cryogenics in the book too. There's this, of course, they want their bodies back, but there's a whole new wave because of AI of largely men who think they can upload their mind to the mainframe and live forever as a kind of platonic ghost of information. Like the body doesn't matter at all to them. And this seems so wrong to me, but I think it's kind of masculine. I think it's kind of a male thing.
Yeah, but my brain is worth keeping long after my body is gone. I find it a horrifying idea. I also find it really lonely and sad.
What are you going to do in that platonic heaven of information?
Yeah. What big thoughts are you going to bring? I find it all quite depressing. But of course, in the cryonics place, it was mostly men who had been frozen. But
it was a woman looking after them. And there's a woman sort of tending to them. And now,
would you do that? Would you guys get yourselves frozen? Would you? Would either one of you be up for that?
Only because I think it's so ridiculous and hilarious. I might do it just to have people go like, "Yeah, he's frozen. He's hanging upside down," and just because it's
coming to see you.
So fucking ridiculous. It makes me laugh.
It'll be an interesting addition to your Wikipedia.
Exactly. Just leave them guessing. Leave them interested in me as I go out. One of the people I was most interested in was the crime scene cleanup guy.
Oh, yeah.
In your book, who seems like, I mean, he was a challenging sounding guy anyway. I mean, and the whole thing sounds, but it was interesting because it made me think a lot about, because you were talking about the photos on his website, these horrible, and we were talking earlier about these incredibly visceral, disturbing photos. Have you ever been to this Museum of Death? Have you ever been to this Museum of Death in Hollywood?
One in LA?
Yeah, the one in LA. And it's like, and it's an interesting place to me because I went a long time ago, and there's these incredibly disturbing pictures in there. There's pictures of this couple took as they murdered her husband, and it's incredibly disturbing. And they're really, really gory and really to the point where you're saying these can't be real. They're so fucked up and gory that you're like, this can't possibly be real, but they're real. And I always think to myself, that's different. That's a different way of trying to acquaint yourself with something's different about it that I don't love. And it's like, and when I was younger, I had this thing of like, oh God, I got to see the picture of the guy with his head blown off. Yeah. And it feels very young to me still, this kind of like, I got to see the guy with his face blown to pieces.
Yeah. It's voyeurism.
Yeah, voyeurism.
But I found, because when I was a teenager, I was like that too. It was rotten.com for me. In the early days of the internet, I had to see the guy with his head blown off, and we were all daring each other to look at these things. But I think I was doing it in a different way to the other kids. The other kids were just like going, "Oh, gross," and I was interested because it was all I had. Pictures of like normal dead bodies weren't all over the internet. It was just the horrible ones. And I like that there is a Museum of Death. I find it incredibly tacky.
Very. But it's kind of its shtick, is that it's super tacky.
It's kind of its shtick. If there was a really, like a curator could do an amazing thing with the stuff they have, but you go in and you just kind of feel dirty because it is voyeurism. It is like, even the Gacy pictures of the clowns.
Totally.
It's just like pictures on the fridge, like their children's pictures. It just feels like, But I go to these things. I've
me
even
too.
been to the one in New Orleans. I've been to 2 locations. Because I can't, even though I've seen all this stuff that I've seen for my book, I'm still interested in it.
But then you have to take a shower afterwards because you
and apologize to whichever friend I've taken with me.
No, I just same thing. I really regretted these 2 poor people I took with me. I was like, sorry guys. I just was like, but it's peep showy and it smells of cleaning fluid, of kind of cheap cleaning fluid, and it's like but that's its shtick in a way.
Yeah,
and that's what I mean. It's this kind of, it's not dispensing,
but that's like, it's sort of turning death into a sort of grotesque. Sticky, because it's easier to handle when it is tacky.
Yes, that's key, I think.
Yeah, and I found that, when I got this book deal, what I wanted when I was speaking to publishers was, do you want to make it into a tacky death book? Are you going to put a pink sparkly skeleton on the front with googly eyes, and because that's not what my book is going to be.
Right.
You're going to reject my manuscript.
Right.
And so I really wanted to veer away from exactly what the Museum of Death is, even though that is a place I go to.
Totally. And even though it has its place in some weird way, but it's not a kind of respect towards death. It's this kind of like prurient awe in the face of like, wow, that guy's...
And it's like laughing at it going, I can handle this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not frightened of you because...
Do you guys remember that Body Worlds where you would go to the museum and you would have like, not just a skeleton, but a fully rubberized, human,
with the nipples.
With the nipples.
It always had the nipples on.
And they'd be like riding a unicycle and like playing cards, like playing poker. And when it was very popular, I actually sent away because I was trying to interview this guy, Gunther von Hagen.
Me too. Did you get the body donation form?
So I'm filling out the body donation form, which you obviously were looking at too. But halfway through it, I had this moment because I'm laughing. I'm thinking this is going to be hilarious. I'm going to be like a fucking guy, And then I realized, wait a minute. What if my son saw me like riding a unicycle, splayed out, and I was like, whoa, this isn't funny,
Or position so you're having sex with someone who donated their body from Austria or something, like just a different person.
Yes.
It's so weird.
It's very weird.
I think Gunther von Hagens exists in his own world of... there's an argument going on right now with the Mutter Museum and other museums here in London. People are kind of freaking out. They're trying to kind of correct the misdeeds of the past by removing various exhibits.
How so?
Yeah, what's an example?
So, like what the Mutter is doing right now is they're trying to focus more on health and wellness and less on death. They don't want it to be a gross, quirky museum anymore. They want it to be about health and wellness, which
no one's going to go.
I know.
Exactly.
Why?
No one's going to go. But I think if you just have health and wellness, that's like having a lavender bath. And it's like, that's not going to help you. No. I think you can't have the health without having the stakes of death. It's all intertwined, and to have a museum like the Mutter to be frightened of death and
crazy.
To be denying death is insanity to me. Because it's one of the only places you can see this stuff.
When I was you talk about the Hunterian, and that's one of my favorite places too. It's like the Mutter Museum, but it's in London, and the whole story there is amazing with William Hunter and John Hunter, and it's an anatomy museum, but also
I've never been there.
You would love it. But I was there one time, and there was a mother and her son, and he was a tween or something, not a teenager, and he's looking at one grotesque thing after another in some vitrine or some jar, and he's just going, "Oh my God, oh no!" And the mother says, "Is this disturbing? Should we go outside?" And he goes, "No, absolutely not." He's like,
correct.
We must,
correct.
Stay and look
face
at
it like that. Face it like that monk. Just stand there and face it. But like the Mutter stuff, that it's all it gets very complicated because some people have willed parts of their body to the museum. Like a man who had a heart transplant gave his huge heart to the museum so they had a heart to display. People have given their fetuses to the museum, and they're talking about how
Are people seeing that as ethically questionable now, or like?
So it's like the new curators are saying this is upsetting for people and it's quite challenging, so we're going to hide all this stuff. And so people are going, well, especially the mothers are saying, but we gave you that for a reason, and it gave meaning to my loss.
Yeah.
And now you're trying to hide it because it's challenging for people. I think people should be challenged.
Yes,
I agree. I totally agree. I mean, I think that I had the experience of watching my mother die for 17 hours, and I wouldn't change that experience for the world of actually watching somebody die, your mother die. And it's like, it's essential, I mean, it's important. It's essential.
And I came to that conclusion at the end of the book that if you are okay enough around this stuff, then you can be there for someone when they are dying. Because I've spoke to so many people who have let family members die alone in hospitals because they couldn't face it. God. They didn't want the last image. I've had messages from people saying, I've read your book and now I regret it. And I've had other ones saying, I've read your book, but I'm still glad I didn't.
Wow.
It's so subjective, but I'm glad you wouldn't swap it.
No, I definitely wouldn't. No, it was kind of extraordinary. It's a weird thing to say. It was extraordinary, but it was. I mean, it was fucking nuts. And the extent to which it was awful, horrible, and then stepping outside of it and watching this process happen was kind of astonishing. It's like, wow, that's actually that thing you hear happens.
Wow.
You hear about the death rattle, or you hear about the flesh going cold, and it's terrible. And it's my mother, but it's like, it was extraordinary.
Well, what do you think about there's sort of this existential view about death, which is that this is like Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus, and they all said, well, you have to think about death a lot so that then your life will be more meaningful, like it'll have some more impact or gravitas or something. So some people think, you're not, it's the philosophical position. You have to think about death. Otherwise you're just blindly going through life. Yeah.
It could also be philosophers justifying their thinking.
Their morbidity.
But
you just got to sell books.
but I also found that people who work in death, like I would much rather be in a pub full of people who work in the death industry than actors. Sorry, Paul.
Oh, here we go.
Wow, I didn't see that coming. Jesus Christ.
You were way late on that.
Wow, holy crap. So the big guns come out. Wow, well into the interview. Holy shit. Okay, tell me more. I want to know. Because frankly, to be honest, Hayley, me too. But I want to hear why. I want to hear why you say that.
Well, I found that people who work with dead bodies, there's a lack of ego and a lack of, they just seem to have made some kind of okayness, with everything that is going to happen.
They're salt of the earth types.
They're like, fuck it, let's have a drink. Yeah. Whereas I've interviewed
actors, on the other hand,
actors, my God, you're in a room full of neuroses and ego and all sorts of stuff. But you just feel safe in a room full of people who work with dead bodies, which
that makes sense. You're not safe in a room full of actors, let me tell you. It's definitely not a very safe place. In theory, though, actors, the right kinds of actors should have people who are expanding themselves and utilizing their empathy to such a degree that they should be like people who work in the death industry. But unfortunately, a lot of them aren't.
Hashtag not all actors.
Thank you. Wow. No, I hear you. I would rather not too. It's a drag. They're a drag.
So we don't always learn things in the Chinwag, but I have learned that the death industry workers are more pleasant than actors, and so that's a crucial bit of information.
That's absolutely, yeah. Don't hang around. Yeah, have a drink with a mortician and not an actor.
And not an actor
in the future. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, super fun.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, really, really a pleasure. And the book is great. It's really awesome.
It's excellent.
Beautifully written. Really awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein.
Original theme music by Luke Top, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Editing and mixing by Jeff Neal. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.